I guess, are we? Oh, we are live. Hi, everyone. This is Erica Hines, founder of Black Women Thriving, and I am here for our monthly LinkedIn Live that I do around topics having to do with thriving, um, particularly centering Black women's experience of thriving at work. And every month, I like to take a certain topic. Um, this month, we're going to be talking about like, we're going to be talking about you did everything right and you're still overlooked, and sort of performance stuff. And I want to give you my take on what I'm seeing, what I've seen in my research, and how I think it applies today. So I'm happy whether you're watching this live or if you're able to join this live or if you see it afterwards. Hopefully, it can present some thought provoking stuff to you um, that will hopefully, what I always want is to move you a little bit closer to feeling as though you're thriving at work. So, um, I want to start by saying if you feel as though you are someone in like the last year, I'll use the last 12 months, who's been giving your all at work, but still feeling like it's not enough or feeling like you don't have, like it's not necessarily being appreciated or that it's being recognized, I just want you to know that you're not alone. And I think you know you're not alone because you probably have friends, or if you're online or chronically online, like some of us, it's sort of like been a common thread of what we've heard about people and their jobs, their professions right now, which is so many people are questioning their places at work. Um, and I think that there are like organizational factors that play into that. But I really want to talk about like what I've heard people say that really kind of illustrate to me that people have said like they're kind of done. They're done showing up in their organizations or their departments or their companies and giving their all, and still feeling like they're either invisible or feeling as though the goalposts have moved, or and they're wondering like, what's the point? There's a certain amount of, I think it's gone beyond resignation, of the people feeling like, oh, I'm like resigned about this. I think it's really sort of become a little bit of like a fatalism where people are like, just give me my paycheck so that I can leave, which is fine. Um, Good, like have that orientation towards your work. And I think that there were people who um, really do feel. I think that there are still some people who feel kind of like in the middle of that because what they may be thinking is like, I like my job or I like the area that I work in, but I'm just not feeling it right now because there's too much going on, or I'm just not seeing the complete payoff that I wanted. So today, I want to ask us one simple question, which is if you've done everything right, why do you still feel overlooked? And I want to talk about this gap between effort and recognition. So, I think, particularly when I'm thinking about Black women, one of the things that we have often been said, actually, Black people in general, American Black people in general, is you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Um, and that is like a pervasive universal truth in our communities. And the question that I have about that is, um, what are the benefits of having that be sort of a belief system? But on the other side, what are the challenges or what does that cost you? So I leave that as like the first question for consideration as we're having this discussion. So Let's just get into like the hidden cost of overperformance. And, I will say this, just going back to what I was just talking about, which is working twice as hard to get half as far. Like, that is literally saying you have to perform more to get half as far, right? But I want to talk about the answer to the last part of my question to you about that statement, which is like, what is the cost of overperforming? And I want to couch it in before I start sort of getting off into like the data. I actually want to talk about this from like a really timely perspective, which is, you know, um, here we are again being told that meritocracy is the way that we decide things in the workplace or decide things in whatever professional positions that we have. Meritocracy, that is the way that we make decisions and good work that people are doing. And there was a time when we had started to be able to really challenge that myth, that there is a myth of meritocracy. um, and that myth really centers around some questions, which is who decides what merit is, um, who sets the criteria, right? So what do we mean when we talk about meritocracy? Which, listen, on its face, what we're saying is like, we will make decisions based upon the merit of people's achievements. Well, what does merit mean? It's highly subjective. Um, so, that is complaint number one. Number two is, what are the criteria that decide meritocracy? Um, those have generally been very fluid and not very transparent. And I think, going off of that, the third one is like, even if we were to have uh, factors around performance and they were based upon merit, would everybody know what those were? Would they be transparent? And who would know about them? And where would they be told about them? Like, there's all sorts of problems around returning to meritocracy. And the connection between this whole pushback to talking about merit and overperformance is that if we move the goalpost, and I, as a Black woman who already feels as though I have to perform and overperform, I'm put in a no-win situation of constantly running after a goal that shifts and moves further away. And not only is that frustrating, it's actually tiring. It is actually uh, um, it is unhealthy, and I don't just mean mentally unhealthy. So let me just sort of share what I have heard in terms of like overperformance, which is, and I want to hear if this resonates with any of you, which is hit every target. I've stayed late, I've delivered results, but I still haven't been promoted or recognized or received that pay bump. Um, I still got passed over, and I have to continually prove myself. That is the problem with the uh, the newly returned way of thinking about performance. Um, and I think that we have had way too many times where, when I think about my own professional career of having those goalposts moved, I've been made to feel like it was me, that I was not actually living up to what it was required of me, when in fact, it was actually the system and the organization. And what do I mean by the system? I mean the policies and practices of the organization and how they were running and viewing performance and evaluating it. Okay. And when I've thought about this in the context of the work that I have been doing for the last few years around thriving, I really have thought about, like, if if folks feel as though they cannot get ahead, if folks feel like it at work that they cannot make it into get that pay bump. If folks feel like actually they don't even have sort of steady and settled ground on which they know whether they have a job or not, they continually find themselves, and I've said this on a few lives, and I'll say it again, they find themselves continually in what I'm now beginning to call a survival loop. You are in this loop of survival. You are in this loop of like, oh, the cycle where we feel as though we've done everything right, but we still can't get ahead. We're doing everything right at work and in our personal lives. But we can't get ahead. We can't get any sure footing. And if we continue to just stay in that survival loop, you just have to imagine that really tugs at our psyche, right? And we don't have the ability, if we were stuck in this survival loop, to ever think about what is beyond that. What's next? What could be different? All you're focused on is thinking about making it through the day, doing your job, leaving, being able to just get that paycheck so that you can go and perhaps just go and like be able to live, um not necessarily dream of what's next. And the reason I'm sort of pausing here is that I think like in having this discussion and bringing this to you all, I really want us to, in some ways, be able to acknowledge that we are in a survival loop. That we are, and some of that is by design. Because if you can stay in a survival loop, then you don't have hope. And I think that's what I'm talking about. So my area of focus is having hope about work, right? My area of focus is thinking about you can thrive at work. But as I talk about the survival loop and what I want to really like get across is that the more we stay in the survival loop, the more our hope just is being extinguished. And it means that we cannot move forward. Not that anyone needs to give us permission to move forward, but we cannot move forward because we're stuck in here. Okay. So returning back to the workplace, because that's the area that I work on, right? And if we think of the survival loop, let me give you some examples from our research that show, and this was research that we now did 3 years ago, but really give you some idea around how people feel as though they can be stuck in survival, which is, one of the statistics that we found very surprising, maybe not surprising, but like distressing, was only 32% of Black women felt fairly evaluated at work, even when they felt like their performance was strong. And even when we had numbers later on of Black women feeling very confident about their skills, right? What showed up was that I, as a Black woman, could feel very confident about my performance. Could I do my work, right? Could I show up and do my work and then do a good job? That number being high, but the belief that I was going to be fairly evaluated being low. And if you think like all of this connects to my, messages around overperformance, around merit, and this idea of moving in survival mode, like of course it's going to be, if that is your feeling, um, and that percentage of 32% of Black women, that was 3 years ago. I can tell you in my gut, I know that number is either the same or lower now. And what I want to say about thriving and how thriving fits into this is that thriving does not come from like going harder. Thriving does not come from working harder. It comes from having workplace conditions where you feel as though you can be seen, supported, uh, where you can feel as though you are creating value, where you feel like you have some autonomy in your job, where you feel as though you have some meaning in your work. Thriving comes from feeling as though it's not about merit. It, it's about being energized about your job and what it is that you're learning. That's what thriving is. Okay. So when we don't feel as though our thriving is possible because of our performance, because we feel overlooked, right? These are parts of being stuck in the survival loop. But if we were to think about and allow ourselves to think about thriving outside of survival, is that possible? What we would start to maybe begin to investigate, not necessarily what we have to change, but what's missing in our organizations, is we might start to think about like, are we working in a place? Does our place offer space where we feel as though we have energy at the end of the day? I already know the answer to this. And the answer is no. Burnout is a norm. It has become the norm. I can list numbers from our research. 88% of Black women and gender expansive folks saying they don't feel like they have reserve at the end of the day. 88%. That's only 12 points from 100%. Okay. Um, us feeling as though we have to overperform has burnt us out. Okay. Um, we're not thriving if we have to run on empty. The second part that is affected from this idea of having to overperform is growth. Do we feel as though we're able to grow? I think in the past, we have been told that our growth is really about like doing your job well, but it's also about being invested in, right? Are you invested in my growth? And in all of the years that I have been working in organizations or working with organizations, um, the relationship that organizations have had with investing in people's like growth has become even smaller and even more tenuous. Um, I would say this is anecdotal. I think that a lot of organizations don't want to invest in growth because they want somebody who can immediately come in and jump in. And the the very few that are interested in growth, right? The question has to become like, are those unicorns? And how do they distribute those growth opportunities? Okay. So when we're talking about like, hey, if I were in a thriving or I were in an organization where I felt like I could thrive, I would hope that I could be in an organization where when we were talking about my growth, that it wasn't just what I was putting in, but it's how the organization was investing in me. Okay. And overperforming and not getting any sort of payout is not the solution to thriving. And the third thing that I want to talk about that happens, or that would what a thriving, uh, how I would feel like I was thriving and not always overperforming and being overlooked for growth, for feeling as though I had energy at the end of the day, is around feeling like I had meaning at work. And I particularly want to hit on this one because I think that, and again, this is like a gut feeling. But that gut feeling tells me that I think that a lot of people no longer care about the meaning of it. I know that through all of this, I could be a Debbie Downer, but I don't, I'm just reflecting what I'm seeing. I don't think I'm like highly interpreting things here. So many of us are coming and just doing the work, but it's not work that reflects our values. It's not work that reflects our voices. And these are people, we could say that there was a time when I think that we could say, okay, for those of us, I know there's a certain group of working people where like, that's the case. No, this is widespread. This is from somebody making $7 an hour to someone making you know, $500,000 a year. People have lost meaning. And I what I see when I read on LinkedIn or I look at Instagram is that, people are like, I don't need to have meaning at work. But it also means that people are just showing up and conforming to whatever needs to be said and done so that they can get the paycheck and leave. Um, and I think that that's a real loss for organizations. Um, and I also, for folks who want to really who view parts of their job as like their vocation, I think that there's a loss there as well. Again, I want to highlight some Black women thriving data here that sort of illustrate this point. In our study, what we found is only one in four, so that's 25%, only one in four Black women felt like they could show up authentically in the workplace. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. Again, our research sort of bears those out. But when think about if only 25% of Black women felt like they could show up authentically in the workplace, again, there's lots of factors, that matters. When people feel like they can't even show up with parts of themselves, not maybe their entire selves, but parts of themselves in the workplace, it means that they're spending a lot of time and a lot of effort shielding themselves. Okay. And that is a way of them not feeling as though they can thrive. When people feel as though they have lost their connection to the meaning of their job, and I'm not talking about just people who are like, I do, I'm out here changing the world. No, whatever your meaning is, but when people feel as though they've lost that meaning to their work, that is also a disconnect from them feeling like they can thrive. So I want to stop by or finish up by saying, I think what I have tried to do in this live is to say, like, we have been trained to prove our worth. And I've given you the example of what Black people have heard. Now, I would say this that message may be different depending on what your background is. But I do think that we have all heard messages about this idea of you have to constantly be proving your worth, constantly, constantly, constantly. So when we hear things like we're going to decide stuff on merit, it's a it's beyond a disconnect to us. And I want to offer this idea of what if we were to think about, at least individually, actually not just individually, but organizationally, about building workplaces where thriving is possible, and the idea that we have to overperform becomes outdated. What would our work look like if we didn't have to constantly perform for recognition? Um, and if our value was understood, and I don't mean that in a Pollyanna way, I think I mean it in a like, could we create policies and practices that actually did that? And I think we were headed that way, and now I think we've got pushback. If something feels off or sustainable, and I wrote this down, I think part of our jobs as individuals is not to internalize that too quickly and not to think that it was us, but to ask ourselves, is this us or is this like, or are there some policies and practices that aren't working the way that they're supposed to work? Um, I think we have to ask ourselves essentially when something happens, is this me? And at times it is us. But we also have to ask ourselves, is it me or is it the system? And in terms of thinking about the workplace is a system. And what I posit is that the workplace currently is not set up for us to thrive, but it can be. So, this topic that we have worked on is, or worked on, or that I've talked about, spent time talking about. These are the types of topics that we explore in Thrive Hive. uh, in our community, Thrive Hive and Thrive Hive Pro, if this is something that appeals to you. This month, actually, we really are going to dig deeper into like this narrative of you have to work twice as hard, how that shaped us, and how we can shift. And, I'm really going to dig into like what are the like individual organizational and like even sort of like leadership practices that can help us shift from this idea of overperformance to thriving. So if that appeals to you, if that's something that you really think that you would like to learn about, whether personally or for your organization, join us over in where we do our work. So thank you so much. As you can see, we've given you the opportunity to click on things, and I will be back next month. Thank you.